What's up guys, Billy here, and as winter approaches, drone flying can become a little bit more difficult due to the colder weather outside. In this video, I'll be going over my tips for flying your drone during the cold winter months. Now the operating temperature for most DJI drones is between 32 degrees and 104 degrees Fahrenheit. This is 0 degrees to 40 degrees in Celsius. Now it does get a lot colder than this in some areas of the world, so be sure to follow along with these tips to make the most of your next winter drone flight. First and foremost, invest in some proper gloves. Once your hands get cold while you're flying, it's going to turn into the worst experience ever. You're going to lose mobility with your fingers, and you're ultimately not going to get the footage that you want. So what I would recommend is not going with these big puffy gloves because it's going to be a lot harder to control your remote controller. The ones that I tend to use are these skin-tight North Face gloves I picked up from Dick's. Again, they're really easy to slip on my fingers, and I'm also really not losing any range of motion. I can still grip the controller as I usually would and push all the buttons with my fingers. If you need to, because these really aren't that warm, you can throw some hand warmers right inside of the palm or maybe on the back of your hand, and that'll warm up your hand really well. Another thing I do want to mention is be sure that no matter what kind of gloves you go with, you get ones that are like the E-tip gloves so you can use your mobile device through the actual glove rather than taking the glove off, change the settings through your drone, and then have to throw the glove back on. Again, that just totally eliminates all the annoying steps and also the cold hand that you have in between taking it on and off. So anyway, for the rest of these tips, I figured I'd head outside. It is a little bit crappy outside, but I figured I'd change up the scenery. Second tip is all about batteries. Colder weather means shorter flights. In general, your batteries are going to drain quicker when they're exposed to colder temperatures. What I typically like to do is store my batteries in a controlled environment. So in a warm location, that usually means my car when I go out and shoot at a location. I also like to actually set up my full drone while I'm sitting here in my car. I've got the propellers on, I took off the gimbal guard, and I also threw on the ND filter, whatever I end up needing. And also I can just go ahead, plug in the battery, and I'll be good. Now this does change if you guys are going to be using a backpack. So let's say you're going to be walking somewhere and you don't have the option of keeping your batteries in your car. You can always throw some hand warmers inside of your battery compartment or just inside of your backpack in general, and that'll keep your whole bag warm, all of your electronics fairly warm. But be sure not to touch the two together, so don't put your hand warmer directly against the battery as you could overheat it. Moving your drone from a warm area to a cold area, whether it be from your car or from your backpack to outside, will cause your lens to fog up from time to time, so definitely be sure to check that out. Wipe it down with microfiber cloth, or you could even use the end of your sleeve. Either one will work perfectly fine, but that's definitely something to check before you take off, as it will cause some fairly undesirable footage. So now that we've taken all the necessary precautions and are ready to fly, we first need to warm the drone up. It's just like a car, you need to let it run before we can actually go and put stress on the aircraft. To begin our process of warming up our drone, first we must turn the drone on, which I've done off camera, as I wanted the IMU to calibrate and the gimbal to calibrate, which could take about a minute. So once it says ready to go, GPS in the top left corner, we can prime our motors by pushing the two sticks inwards and down towards the left corner. Now that will prime our motors, and I usually like to let the drone sit there for about a minute with the motor spinning and the battery starting to warm up, as well as those internals. Now some people will say that you want to hover about 5 feet in the air, although I think that puts a little bit too much stress on the motors to begin with. So what I usually like to do is prime those motors for about 30 seconds, and then from there, fly to about 5 feet and let it hover. So again, prime the motors. We're gonna let it sit like that for about 30 seconds. Make pretend that 30 seconds went by, and then we'll hover up to about 5 feet. Once it's been hovering for about 30 seconds, you're good to go. Alright, so I figured I'd come back inside here to finish up this video because, first of all, a soccer team showed up to the field I was filming in. Second of all, it got a little bit dark outside. And third, it started raining. So anyway, I've got 4 more tips to share with you, and I'm going to try to get through these as quickly as possible. So let's go rapid fire. Once we're up in the air filming, something to be careful of is your exposure level. Now this usually goes without saying because you don't want your shot to be too overexposed or too underexposed, but something that you really need to be careful of are the ice patches and also the snow on the ground, as when the sun is reflecting off of those bright surfaces, it could totally blow out your shot. Now a good way to combat this is with ND filters. I personally go with the ND8 filter almost all of the time, but if I go and I shoot in a snowy location, I might reach for the ND16 instead, just because, again, your shot could be totally blown out with all of the sun reflecting off of the ground. A good way to monitor this is to always have your histogram on to be sure that your shot is not totally blown out, and also keep a watch over that exposure value. And of course, something I always do is shoot in the manual mode so you can keep track of the shutter speed, aperture, and ISO that you're using. Aside from monitoring your exposure levels, be gentle on the sticks and don't push the drone full throttle unless you really have to cut through some wind or maybe avoid an obstacle, as this will significantly drain the battery. As I said, your battery is going to drain faster because of the cold weather outside, and increasing the load that you put on the battery from making jerky movements or flying as fast as possible is really going to take a toll on your flight time. Another thing to look out for as we're flying around is moisture. It's pretty obvious that electronics and water don't mix, and during the winter months the air is filled with moisture, whether it be fog, rain, or snow. It's just not even worth it to fly your drone in these conditions because first of all, the lens is going to get all fogged up and it could get little raindrops on it, basically ruining your footage or the photos that you're going to be taking, and it could also ruin the internal electronics as well as the motors. On a side note, I would love to see the new drones coming out from DJI and other companies going forward have some sort of waterproofing or water resistance. I know that the new DJI Matrice series, the Matrice 200 series, is weatherproof. You're actually able to fly that through the rain, which is really cool. I think it would probably make these newer drones a little bit more expensive, but in my opinion, I would definitely pay the extra cash to have a weatherproof drone. Anyway, moving on to the final tip for this video, be sure to land a little bit earlier than you usually would. Typically what I like to do is drain my battery down to around 15% to shoot as much footage as possible, and as you guys know, at 10% the drone will actually begin landing by itself. So I take that 5% from 15% to 10% to get the drone back to me safely and land it. Now during the winter months when it's a little bit colder outside and your drone flights will be shorter due to that battery dying more quickly, I always like to actually land once it hits 20%, and I'll actually go into the battery settings and tweak my different warnings around a little bit. So usually I have my critically low battery warning at 10% and my low battery warning at 20%, but I typically like to bump those up by 5% when I'm flying in colder conditions, just so that I can be more safe than sorry. So guys, there we have it. Those are my biggest tips and big things to look out for when you're flying your drone in the cold. It's starting to get pretty nippy here in Pennsylvania, and I wanted to make this video as sort of a refresher for myself and also to share some of my tips with you guys. Now I know that I didn't cover everything in this video, so if you guys have any other tips of your own, be sure to leave them down in the comment section so that not only myself can read them, but other viewers can read them. But yeah guys, hope you enjoyed the video, and as always, I'll talk to you later. Peace.